I would like to welcome everyone to Gender Identity. When do children know and much more? The nuances of LGBTQ plus and mental health, provided by the PA Care Partnership Grant in association with the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, also known as OMSOS, along with the PA Department of Health. Today's moderators are part of the PA Care Partnership team. Nancy Massey is our chat monitor, and myself, Jamal Ford, is today's moderator.
Hi, I'm Nancy Massey. Thank you, Jamal. I just want to do a couple quick housekeeping. We use the Q&A for questions. So if you haven't done this before, roll your mouse along the bottom of the screen. You'll see a Q&A. Place your questions in there. As part of Jamal moderating, he keeps his eye on the Q&A, and he may even interrupt Melissa if there's a really good question. So if not, we're going to try and hold the questions until the end. We've got 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. The other thing that we have found to be extremely useful in our webinars this calendar year has been asking the people who are in the audience, often who are people that are working in the same area as the discussion topic, or know people who are, or know about resources. And if you want to share any resources related to today's talk, please feel free, put them in the chat. And after the webinar, I go through and I compile them. And by Monday, I'll send out an email to everybody with a list of the resources that have been shared with us today during the webinar. I want to say that I am especially delighted to have Melissa Perkins as today's speaker. Mental health and gender identity is such an important discussion, especially as it teaches us how we can be supportive and to be allies to today's youth and young adults. Melissa is going to help us continue along our path of understanding. We are here to learn and support our youth and young adults, and thank you for joining us in this journey. Melissa Perkins has over 25 years of experience working in social services. She has provided direct care to adolescent youth in residential programs, managed a youth residential program, provided individual mental health and drug and alcohol therapy, provided drug and alcohol group therapy, facilitated court-ordered batterers intervention groups, and most recently, she has focused on delivering training on LGBTQ plus issues. Melissa holds 2 master's degrees, one in education from Duquesne University, and the other in public policy management from the University of Pittsburgh. Please welcome Melissa Perkins.
Thank you, Nancy. Oh my gosh, 25 years. I think I need to change that bio because I'm like, who is that old person, 25 years? First, I want to say thank you all for being here today. I truly appreciate you spending the next couple of hours with us. Again, my name is Melissa Perkins, pronouns she, her, hers. And again, I do want to thank Nancy and Jamal and the team at PA Care Partnership for organizing this and supporting me through the process, and just with all the behind the scenes work that they have done. I also want to give a shout out to a JPO out of Berks County, Megan, who has helped me with some of my technical stuff on some of my videos, and certainly OMSOS, and lastly, but certainly not least, the fine folks at the state that work at the Bureau of Family Health that I have had a great relationship with for over 10 years now. So again, I think Nancy laid out kind of, I don't want to say the rules, but how things are going to work. So if you have any questions, please, I'm seeing 620 people now, so it's hard for me to say, let's all have a conversation, but please put your any questions you have in the Q&A, and as she said, Jamal will monitor them. And as we go through, I will ask if folks have questions, and you can put them in that Q&A, and hopefully we can address all of them. So I want this really to be about you and to get the most out of this as you can. So I think Nancy did a great job of telling you kind of my background. So, much of my career has been doing, working with kids. And then, you reach a certain point where that just direct care work or even managing direct care work becomes really hard. And I like having my weekends off and not being on call. So that's where, probably for, like I said, about the last 15 years, I focused on doing training. And I'm really excited to be here and to deliver this all to you today. So here's what we're going to do. We have a lofty agenda, and Nancy has already warned me, so don't think at the end that she's being rude, because she has told me if I run out of time, she's going to say, Melissa, you need to stop. So we've already established that between us, so it's all good. Don't think of anything that I'm not prepared for that. So we're going to talk about the fluidity of sexual and gender identity and expression. And one of the bad things about Zoom is I can't see you all. So I have no idea of what kind of age range you fall into. And I think, for those of us like myself, I have 25 years experience. I didn't start when I was 10. So I am of the AARP crowd. So I think those of us of a certain age, we were really brought up in more of a binary world. So we'll just talk about the fluidity and how things have evolved through the years. And I think it's a challenge when you are an older person, not old, but an older, even somebody in your 40s that are working with young folks. Just the language and where young folks are today is very different than where it was when you were young, probably. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the social bias, and really it is the social bias, the context of discrimination that puts our folks at risk for some of the health disparities. Just because an individual identifies as LGBTQ does not mean they will experience the health disparities, but it's really trying to navigate this world as an LGBTQ person with more hurdles than our non-LGBTQ folks. We're going to talk about how to be an ally. So each and every one of you, we're up to 642 now. So all 642 of us, we have the ability to be an ally and create a welcoming environment. Now, some of you might be in, supervisory leadership roles where you are in more of a position to implement systemic change, but each and every one of us on this call have the ability to make change. And then we'll talk about some best practices and resources. So I know we have people we know Nancy's over in Philadelphia, Jamal's in Harrisburg, I'm here in Pittsburgh. So I know there's a lot of people on this call that are not from Allegheny County, but please think about what Allegheny County is saying. So several years ago, Allegheny County implemented the SOGI project. And as a part of the project, they developed several standards of practice. And one of the standards of practice is, professional expectations. And I think it's a shame that we have to have professional expectations, but, sometimes we do. So, really what this is about, and as I go through, the PowerPoint, the training today, it's about respect. There are going to be things that you might not get. And even when we're done, you still might be like, I still don't get that. And that's okay. Not getting it is okay. But what we need to be mindful of is we need to be respectful. We need to be respectful of the differences in people. So if you notice the previous slide when I talked about the training objectives, nowhere did it say that I want to change your opinions or your personal beliefs. That is not my goal for today. My goal for today is to give you some information and to hopefully, equip you with more knowledge as you go forward and working with LGBTQ individuals. So I will say, because I use the acronym SOGI, and I sometimes I do this so much and I swap slides around and I forget, I don't always include it. So SOGI stands for sexual orientation, gender identity expression. And as we start to get into, we're going to start with sexual identity. It's important to realize we all have a SOGI. We all have a sexual orientation, and we all have a gender identity expression. Some folks identify as LGBTQ, but everybody has a SOGI. So remember that as we go through, and we'll talk about when we should be asking those questions. So thank you, Jamal. All right. So.
I love your little heart locket, Bernadette.
Oh, thanks. Howard gave it to me. It's the cutest thing.
Every time I have dinner with his mom, the next day I get jewelry.
Did you know that the iconic Valentine's heart shape is not actually based on the shape of a human heart, but rather on the shape of the buttocks of a female bending over?
So I spent 7th grade dotting my I's with little X's. Cool.
Hey, Penny, how's it going?
Hey, Zach, what are you doing here?
My dad's company prints the menus for this place. Just dropping off some new ones laminated. Makes them easier to clean if people throw up on them. Guess how I got the idea.
Yeah, I got it. Zach, these are my friends, Bernadette and Amy.
Hi.
Hey.
Oh.
Okay, well, it's good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
He's really cute. How do you know him?
Oh, we went out a couple times.
I'm often flummoxed by current slang. Does went out mean had intercourse?
Yes.
No. But in this case, yes.
Interesting. And was it not satisfactory?
No, it was great. He just didn't really challenge me on an intellectual level.
Couldn't you just fool around with him and then listen to NPR?
Wouldn't help. Zach can't even spell NPR.
It's what I do with Howard. I'm much smarter than he is, but it's important to protect his manhood.
Oh.
What's the matter?
I'm suddenly feeling flushed. My heart rate is elevated. My palms are clammy. My mouth is dry. In addition, I keep involuntarily saying, who?
Oh, we know what's causing that, don't we?
It's no mystery. I obviously have the flu coupled with sudden onset Tourette syndrome.
Oh my goodness, Amy Farrah Fowler. Oh.
I love your little heart.
Amy Farrah Fowler. So when we start to think about sexual identity, we're going to look at it in terms of orientation, behavior, and lastly, identity. So with orientation, who makes you go, whoo? So who is it in those times in your life when you're just looking for the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia and you're walking through the streets of Philly? Who might catch your eye and you go, You could be at the grocery store. You could be schools. You know, I can't believe a lot of schools are back this week. I mean, I don't have kids, but that seems like super duper early to me. You know, so when you're dropping off the kids or you're at the PTA meeting or at the football game, you know, who catches your eye, totally unconscious, not even thinking about it? Who makes you go, whoo, has your heart skip a little beat? Is it men, women, both men and women? Are you attracted to everyone? Are you attracted to non-binary people? Or do you have minimal attraction to folks? So when we think about orientation, it's like that magnetic draw. It's unconscious. So like Amy goes, who makes you go, whoo? When we talk about behavior, and for the purpose of our conversation, age appropriate and consensual, we all make conscious choices regarding our sexual behavior. We decide at what point in life to have sex, who to have sex with, what to do while we're doing it, trying to have a baby, not have a baby. We all make choices regarding our sexual behavior. So who are you engaging in behavior with? Men, women, nobody, trans or non-binary folks. So, you know, that orientation, unconscious, behavior, conscious. When we think about identity, it's the I am statement. This is who I am. We should not be deciding what somebody's sexual identity is unless we ask them and they tell us. We should not be like, oh, that's so-and-so looks like they might be based on that, you know, because we all know what happens when we assume. You know, so unless, again, we ask somebody, we don't know how they identify. So I think most folks are familiar with the terms homosexual. We talk about our bisexual folks, largely the binary, you know, men and women. Pansexual, think about a panographic picture. We pan out. So I can be attracted to biological women, trans women, you know, biological men, trans men. It's really about the person. For those of you, I know I'm a little slow on things. Again, I'm part of the AARP crowd, so it can take me, you know, a minute to get with the new stuff. But I just started watching Schitt's Creek, and everybody always talks about the wine scene in Schitt's Creek. So those of you that haven't seen it, it's in season 1. You can YouTube it. Schitt's Creek. It's about the wine label. And the scene basically says it's not what's in the bottle. The label doesn't matter. It's what's in the bottle. So for our folks that identify as pansexual, it's not about the genitalia. It's about, what makes up the person, who the person is. For our asexual folks really have, little desire to engage in sexual behavior. Our demisexual folks really need to have a close relationship, emotional relationship before they will engage in behavior. Let me also say that with these terms, this is obviously not an exhaustive list of terms. When I was putting this slide together, I consulted with folks that I know that do clinical work, and they said this is how most of their clients identify. So again, not an exhaustive list. And the one thing I will say as we go through this, language is constantly evolving. And I think that's what can make it really challenging for folks is, when I first started, training 15 years ago, we didn't use the terms pansexual or asexual or demisexual. So we need to be mindful that the language is constantly evolving. And then there's one more up there, queer. And so my thoughts on queer are, I grew up in an era where queer was always used in a derogatory manner. It was not used for good. Younger folks have reclaimed it. So when you hear somebody, identify as queer, or you hear the word queer, it's not necessarily derogatory. That's not to say that it still can't be used in a derogatory manner, but it can also be used, that's somebody's, how they identify. Where queer can get complicated, sexual and or gender identity. So when I used to do clinical work and somebody would identify as queer, I would say, what does that mean for you? Because you can have 10 folks that identify as queer and you can get 10 different answers. So it's important to ask that. And again, I think, queer is really, gaining, mainstream usage. June was Pride Month. I did a lot of travel in June, and I was at a Target, and they had, those of you know what I'm talking about, the old school tube socks that came up to your knees pretty much, and they had the tube socks and they had queer written on them. And on the first hand, I thought, wow, that's really great that Target is making money off the gays. But I thought, this is really great that we're getting this visibility. And there was a lot of rainbow products at the Target, but I was also concerned because, again, queer is not a word that I am personally comfortable with. I do not like to be referred to as queer. I take personal offense at that. And I think when we have something on socks and on mainstream marketing, we have to be cautious. So that's one of those words that unless somebody uses, you don't use first. So you let them use it first. And then again, even though I don't like that word, when I've worked with folks in the past and that's how they identify, I will use that word because I want to reflect the language of the people that I'm working with. Before we move off of sexual identity, I will say on average, kids know by about the age of 10 how they identify. So, best practice recommendation is that we start asking our kids 10 and up how they identify. Now, again, we're in this, Zoom 650 plus format. So I have no idea, what y'all's backgrounds are. It's a very different thing, being in a mental health setting and asking somebody how they identify versus being the math teacher or being the school counselor. So certainly when I say we should be asking, folks how they identify, it's also situational. So is it relevant to the work that I am doing with this kid? Again, we should not be just asking in math class, hey, everybody, let's do a little ratio problem here. Let's see how people identify. That would not be appropriate. And I know when I say to people that we should be asking, folks 10 and up, people can get kind of wonky with that because that seems like really young. And I get it. But we know kids are, Unfortunately, they're going through puberty at a much younger age. And just because they go through puberty doesn't mean they're off having sex, because again, age appropriate and consensual, but they know who that magnetic draw is. So we should really start asking kids, like I said, at about 10 or up. I'm going to pause for a minute. And if anybody wants to put a question related to sexual identity in the Q&A, we
Actually
will.
have one.
Oh, already. Okay.
Yep. From John, he asked, when you say that kids know by age 10 how they identify, are you referring to sexual orientation, gender identity, or both?
Wonderful question. So we are talking about sexual identity right now. And I'm gonna blow your, was it John that asked the question?
John, yes.
I'm gonna blow your socks off when we start talking about gender. But by and large, when we talk about sexual identity, about on average, about the age of 10, kids know how they identify. And I'll answer the gender question when we get to gender.
Okay.
That's a little teaser there, a little teaser.
And Dawn wanted to know about a couple of terms that you use that she's not familiar with or aware of, like binary and non-binary.
Okay. No, I'm thinking if I want to answer that now or not.
Gotcha.
So binary. If we think about binary, we think about boy, girl, gay, straight. So we think about just kind of like those are the only two options, and we will talk more about binary when we get into gender. And Dawn, if you're still not clear, please ask your question again, and I will further explain.
And Erica would like to know if you could reiterate the 3 factors of sexual orientation.
So when we think about sexual identity, we look at orientation, behavior, and identity. So orientation, kind of like that magnetic draw, like who am I? Makes me go, who am I engaging with in behavior with? And then identity, that internal sense of being, this is who I know myself to be.
Okay, and one last question. Someone would like to know, Yvette, I believe, would like to know, where is the age of 10 based on, or that information coming from? What research?
I would have to get back to you on that, but I do have the site. So it's not, that's not a Melissa number. It's based on best practice recommendations. I can see the book right in front of me. But yeah, so it is based on research.
Thank you.
All right, we good?
We are good.
All right, so sexual identity. So now we're going to mosey into the world of gender. And I think gender used to be easy for a lot of us, and I think it is certainly getting more complex. So when we look at the binary of gender, so boy, girl, male or female, this is what most of us are familiar with. So we will look at it in terms of sex assigned at birth, gender role expression, and lastly, gender identity. So when we think about, sex assigned at birth, when those beautiful little babies come out, all we know is there a penis or a vagina? That's all we know about our little babies. Half the time we don't even know what color their eyes are, because those little baby eyes haven't even opened yet. So just like with our babies, everything is based on genitalia. The same is true, in the animal world. We can tell, even as a city girl, I can tell the difference between the boy birds and the girl birds, and it's based on outward appearance, based on what we see. And if you also think about, while our little babies are at the hospital, we give them a name. Most of our names are gender specific. So we're filling out that. Our birth certificate has a male or a female, an M or an F. And then we also fill out paperwork for our Social Security card. So within a month's time, this little baby is already starting a paper trail based solely on genitalia. That's really all we know about the baby is, their genitalia. And the reason why we have the flamingos in the middle, aside from the fact that I love flamingos, but flamingos are one of the rare examples of not being able to tell their genitalia by outward appearance. So with our flamingos, there's really no difference in height between the males and the females. Their color is based on their diet. So the more shrimp rich their diet is, the pinker they're going to be. The only way to figure out the gender of a flamingo is to do DNA testing. Now, somehow the flamingos can figure it out because they make more flamingos. But for those of us that, are not flamingos, we cannot look at the flamingos and decide this is a boy or this is a girl flamingo. So, what we're assigned, and we see gender, that's what makes it hard. When we think about gender expression, we think about expression, we also think about roles. So again, I can't, I can't see, who we have here today. But it's been my experience that, many of the mental health workers that I encounter are females. Many of the social workers are females. I do a training at Pitt Nursing every semester, and it's a required course. And, the vast majority, like 90% of the participants are female. So what career you go into, who's, when y'all get home tonight, who's making dinner? Today was trash day at our house. Who's taking out the trash? Who's cutting the grass this weekend? Who's the primary person responsible for getting the kids back to school clothes and back to school supplies? And it's not, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, it's not like you enter that relationship and you say, I'm the man and here's what I'm going to do. Or I'm the woman and I'm going to bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan and make you dinner every single night. I think a lot of it is just the messaging that we have gotten through the years, kind of that just implicit messaging that this is what you do. My grandmother, God bless her, to this day, and she's been gone almost 20 years now, I still don't know what she meant when she used to say, now, Melissa, that's not very ladylike. I'm like, well, I don't know. Sorry, can't help it. I am who I am. So what jobs we do, who does what around the house, but also how we, express our outward, our outward expression. So we have, as far as we know, we have 3 men and 3 women on here on the screen. And the reason why I say as far as we know is I have not had personal interaction with any of these folks. Actually, some of them have issued restraining orders asking me to leave them alone. But based on what we know from what we see, in People magazine, and if it's in People magazine, it has to be accurate. We have 3 men and 3 women. So we have Beyonce. I would love to see what Beyonce looks like when she rolls out of bed in the morning, because she always is looks just made up and beautiful and wonderful. Then we have Serena at the office. Any of you tennis fans and Serena fans, sad, sad, sad. She has announced that the US Open in September is going to be her last event. And she's going to focus on being a mom. So I think a lot of times this is her at work. A lot of times you will see her in workout gear when she's running around with her kid, but then also during the award season, and the film King Richard was out and you saw her, she was dressed to the nines. So, more fluidity with how she expresses herself based on the situation. Ellen has had the same style since she's had her, her sitcom back in the 80s. Shirt and pants, which is pretty much those of you that I think there's some folks here that have seen me in person, and that's kind of my wardrobe. Every time I'm out, I have a button-down shirt on and pants. And if you can tell, I have a button-down shirt on today. That's her style. We look at Bruno Mars. I would not call Bruno Mars handsome. I mean, he's a pretty man. He's a pretty man. Then we have Denzel. And if you notice, if you move, Denzel's eyes will follow you. Very handsome. And then we have The Rock. Now, not a lot of our men, look like The Rock, probably more so like our Denzel, but we sometimes have these polar images of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. So we think about, if you're a man, you need to look like The Rock or Denzel. If you're a woman, you need to be, going to the Giant Eagle, looking like Beyonce. That's not how it is, so how do we express our gender? And we do that. I think that's what makes gender really hard, is because based on what we see, we unconsciously default and say male or female, and it's not a conscious thing, but how we express ourselves. When we think about gender identity, so we know that on average, and this comes from Dr. Brill, Stephanie Brill, from some of the work that she's done, that really our babies are born knowing whether or not they're a boy or a girl. It's not until they become verbal at about the age of 3 that they start to assert their gender. And we're going to watch a video in a little bit that will exemplify that. But our kids know whether or not they're a boy or a girl. When we look at gender expression, our kids between the age of 4 and 6 are aware of what society expects of them. So those of you that have, kids, within that range going, to daycare or kindergarten, and you're buying your back to school supplies, they inherently know which backpack they're supposed to get, which lunch thing they're supposed to get, whether it's a boy thing or a girl thing, not because you have told them so, but because of the messaging that they have got, so for most of us, we don't think about our gender, but for those of us that are not cisgender, meaning what you were assigned is how you identify, life can be very, very complicated. All right. So, there we go. So, Gen Z, which are younger folks, I am a proud member of Gen X. So, and I'm sure there's nobody on here that's, a baby boomer. We're all Gen X and up. There's no baby boomers on here. We're all at least Gen X. So our younger generation, the vast majority of them believe that a person shouldn't be defined by their gender, which is very hard for those of us that, were brought up in a world where everything was boy, girl. City of Pittsburgh Public Schools, they did a research project. It was published last year, so it was probably done the year before. Almost like 1 out of 10 of the high school students identify as non-cisgender, meaning what they were assigned at birth is not how they identify. When we look at the Trevor Project provides support to LGBTQ youth who are considering suicide. If we think about Pittsburgh Public, that's like the big swimming pool. If we think about the Trevor Project, that's like the baby pool. So they're already working with LGBTQ kids. So a little over a quarter of them identify as non-cisgender. Again, what they were assigned does not match how they identify. GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. So again, we're in that baby pool because they're surveying and working with LGBTQ youth. Almost half of them, 1 out of 2, identify as non-cisgender. So we're seeing more and more of our younger folks that do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And I think, it can be challenging, based on how old you are and the era that you grew up in and the messaging that you received about gender when you're working with younger folks. So here's what we are seeing now. We're seeing transgender, kind of that umbrella, an umbrella term for individuals who do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And let me say again, this is not an exhaustive list of terms. And I know people can get really frustrated because there seems to be a lot of overlap with the terms, so omnigender, omni meaning all, pangender meaning all. Well, aren't they the same? But here's the thing, we connect, language connects us when it's our own label, not a label that has been assigned to us, So we before we got on the call, we were talking, Nancy being in Philadelphia, and she said, Jamal, well, you're really not from Philadelphia. He's like, oh no, I'm Philadelphia, so it's like when we have our self-assigned label, it helps connect us to people. So, whether we're talking about somebody from Pittsburgh or somebody from Philadelphia or somebody from Harrisburg, so when it's our label that we give ourselves, it can create connection. The one thing I will say on here, so I've been training over 15 years on this topic, and the one term that I've talked about for the last 15 years is the term two-spirit. So while a lot of the other terms are new, two-spirit has been around for a while. So the term two-spirit evolved from our Native American Indian community, and it refers to folks that possess both male and female characteristics. And within that community, those individuals are revered. So a lot of what we think about with gender is, societally, culturally based. Okay, we're gonna watch this quick little video, and then I see there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A, and we will take those after we watch this little video.
All right, folks, here we go. A romaine and kale salad with avocado, cucumber, shishito peppers, and 4 kinds of cheese, sprinkled in balsamic straight from Italy.
Wow. In my day, salads only had 2 ingredients: a rock-hard wedge of iceberg lettuce and a stinky old dried-up tomato.
Sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to eat fast. Alex is stopping by in a few minutes to work on our robotics project.
Alex, is that the girl with that weird dog or the boy with the hat with the wings that flap?
No, Uncle Jay. This is Alex.
Oh, okay. I remember. A very nice young... Come to think of it, well, is Alex a boy or a girl?
Actually, Alex doesn't define themselves as boy or girl.
What else is there?
Back in your day, most people understood the world in terms of just boys and girls. But now we know gender is more complex than that.
Wait, aren't we just talking about whether you're born with a or a hee?
When you're born, your sex is assigned in a medical way, but the sex listed on your birth certificate may not necessarily match your gender identity.
Gender identity is a person's inner experience of who they are in terms of gender, their deep personal sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither.
And while many people have a gender identity that's the same as their assigned birth sex of female or male, that's not always the case, because gender exists on a spectrum. Like transgender, which means a person whose gender identity is not consistent with their assigned birth sex. Non-binary, which means a person whose identity doesn't fall in the category of either male or female. And genderqueer or gender fluid, which means a person who does not identify themselves as having a specific gender at all.
Does gender identity have to do with being straight or gay?
Actually, no. Gender identity has to do with the way you feel about yourself, while sexual orientation is based on the way you feel toward others, the people you may or may not be attracted to.
You know, I really like Alex, and I can tell they're a good friend to you, but I'm still pretty confused about all of this.
That's okay. You don't have to fully understand someone to respect them. To start, try not to make any assumptions about a person's gender, and use the name and pronouns that they ask you to. Above all, be a friend or ally for people of all gender identities.
That's right, Mom. Oh, Alex is here. Come on in.
Hey, everyone.
Oh, hey, Alex. Care for some salad? The balsamic's right from Italy, you know.
All right. So I think, that I think they do a great job of summing it up. And, again, it is these ideas have been around forever. I think we're just getting the language to put on the way people have felt through the years. And, and like I said in the beginning, it's about respect. So Jamal, I see we have some questions. What do we got?
That we do. Let's see, where do I start? So Terry would like to know, she said she has someone, or they said, I'm not sure, just had someone tell me that pansexual includes sexual attraction to animals. What's the response to something like that? It caught me really off guard.
So my response to that is when we talk about sexual identity, that also includes sexual behavior, age appropriate and consensual. Animals cannot consent. So that's usually how when people say that's usually
Okay.
how I respond.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Ren would like to know, how do we help trans kids affirm their identity and also validate parental concern, read puberty blockers, etc.?
Oh, in 30 seconds or less, right? So I think the affirm is easy. I think the affirm part is easy. I mean, certainly you call people by the name that they want to be called. You use the pronouns that they tell you they want to use. I think in terms of any type of hormones, so particularly puberty blockers are really oftentimes cost prohibitive for families. Now, when we see, because you would want to start puberty blockers before somebody goes into puberty. So we could be starting puberty blockers as early as 8. And that involves endocrinologists and a whole lot of people that are way smarter than I am that do all kinds of, testing. And so if you start an 8 or a 9-year-old on puberty blockers, it does just that. It stops them from going into the puberty of the gender that they were assigned. They would have to remain on those blockers probably till about 16. So again, cost prohibitive. When we're talking about putting people, individuals to take, hormones that will affirm their identity, it's not like, and this is what really kind of frustrates me when I see things, articles. It's not like it's not like buying Tylenol at the Walgreens. We need to have, before folks, are prescribed, affirming hormones, we have therapy, we make sure that they are prepared. So it's a journey, and it's not like, hey, I want to do this. The other thing I will say is that we have to be careful for is, since Al Gore invented the internet, people can access hormones on their own. And generally speaking, hormones taken under a doctor's care are very safe. But when we start to take them on our own, we want the desired effect right away. And when we take a dose that isn't safe, then we can see problems. So I don't know whether that answered you, because that's a complex question. So I hope that helped a little bit.
Okay, so we have a few questions about intersex persons.
Okay. Yeah, so intersex, an individual that is intersex, I guess the simple answer is that there's ambiguity with the genitalia at birth. There are also more complex intersex conditions. So an individual can be intersex, and you would not see any necessarily outward abnormalities, differences. But then if they were to go and try to have children and they were to do, blood work or whatever, they would realize that there are some chromosomal issues. But I guess the simple answer is ambiguity with genitalia at birth.
Okay, so the question becomes, how do you find that they are socialized and or make sense of their gender identity, or validating their identity in a greater social context?
So in the ideal world, if we had an intersex child, and again, assuming that there are no underlying medical conditions. So if there's no underlying medical conditions, we would want to not take any medical interventions and let that child kind of navigate life. And again, you would start to see when they start to become verbal at about 3, they're going to start to assert a gender. And then if we needed to take medical steps, then medical steps will be taken. However, if you think about when we see a pregnant individual, what do we say? What are you having? We automatically want to know if it's a boy or a girl. So oftentimes I think, parents feel pressured when that child is born to intervene surgically right away. And again, if there are no underlying medical issues, more often than not, we're going to make that child a female, because it's easier to take away from than to add to. And sometimes the doctors get it right, sometimes they don't. If gender were just about genitalia, what we have, they would get it right 100% of the time. But we know that folks who have had surgery as, newborns, later on in life, they realize that, my parts don't match who I know myself to be.
All right. I think we'll hold off on the rest of the questions for now, and I'll let you get back to your presentation.
So that's a great segue into the next part. Like, how do you identify? So if you identify as cisgender female, or cisgender male, what makes you that identity? So if I were to say to you, what makes you a cisgender female? And I would put on the caveat that you cannot reference your genitalia. So you can't say, well, I know I'm a cisgender female because I have a vagina or I have breasts, so you can't reference your genitalia. You can't reference societal norms. So you can't say, well, because I have long hair or I have a dress on right now. So I think it's hard. I think that's what makes gender like really hard, is because we know who we are, but to be able to articulate, like, I know I'm a cisgender female. I can't tell you how I know that. I just know it. So many of us, for those of us that are cisgender, we never have to explain that to anybody. The world just accepts the fact that we're cisgender. But for folks that identify as transgender or non-binary, we want them to explain it to us. And that's really, really not fair to do that to people. So we have our little boy here, does he wear blue because he's a boy, or am I a boy because I wear blue? And so I have a colleague, I hope she's not on this call. But anyway, she had a baby a couple months ago. This beautiful assigned female, because we don't know what the baby is, but assigned female. But that little baby girl is bald-headed. And every single picture of that bald-headed baby girl, and she has a bow on her head. And I'm like, what are you doing? Leave that little baby girl alone. So we feel this need that we have to put the bows on the kids, or we have to have this boy, dressed in blue. We could take that same picture, swap out the blue for pink, and we would see a little girl. Because again, it's that unconscious default. Because when they're little like that, you can't tell, unless you're changing their diapers, you cannot tell what they are. So I think it's interesting. So we're gonna take a big chance on this right now. I'm actually going to view the chat so we can see. We will take about a minute, not even a minute. I'm watching my clock. How does our society divide gender? So let's see, we got blue and pink colors. Let me see people throw things in the chat. Professions, toys, oh my goodness, clothes, hair, bathrooms, dolls, trucks, sports, sizes, makeup, earrings, character, nails, sports, shoes, jewelry, cars, income. Oh, don't get me talking about income. Criminal justice, absolutely. Menstruation, I see. Bicycles, oh, that's a good one. Party favors. Occupation, school performance, dominance, behaviors, niceness. Yeah, I failed at that. Body hair. Oh yeah. Name, school lines. Oh, don't get me with the dry cleaning cost either. That makes me mad too. Y'all gonna get me riled up. Voice, school dress codes, the pink text. Oh, wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Oh, somebody tried to mansplain to me not that long ago, and I was just about over it. Yeah, so that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was great. So it went by like super fast. My eyes are watering from trying to read it so fast. So here's the things. I think a lot of people said that, clothing, I don't care whether you're shopping at Walmart or Macy's. All you have to do is look up and it tells you where you need to go. So we have the girls, the boys, women's, men's. Shoes, obviously, our accessories, hygiene products. All of our hygiene products, they're all the same until you get to the very last ingredient with the scent, And I will say, I feel really bad for men, because Dove does not think very highly of you, because Dove wants to make sure you know what product to buy, because it's Dove for men, But think about, all the colors of everything. Our clubs, all those animal clubs, the moose, the eagles, the owls, our fraternities and sororities. Somebody talked about, our toys. It used to be, back in the day when there was Toys R Us, you could, you knew where to go. You knew where the boy stuff was. You knew where the girl stuff was. Bikes, I always found that to be counterintuitive with this bar straight across on our boys' bikes. That seems like an accident waiting to happen. But our girls' bikes actually have a little slope because back in the day when bikes were invented, our women bike riders wore dresses. So we needed to lift that dress up over the bike. And that's why it's like that. And so much of this is about money. Our linens now, back when I was a kid, you had solids. That's why now we have all these themed things. School supplies, those of you that are doing that right now, as you all know, those have gone up. I've been hearing all of the stories about that. Entertainment, we have Lifetime for women. What are our commercials? The commercials you see, oh my gosh, how about like, I never watched this, but I just saw this, like Days of Our Lives is going off of like regular TV. It's going to be on one of those streaming channels. Like there's only like one soap opera, I think, left on regular TV. But anyway, the commercials you see on Days of Our Lives are very different than the commercials you see during a football game. Somebody had vehicles. Yeah. So, if I go to the Ford dealer and I'm like, I'm looking for an F-150, they'll be like, well, we'll wait for your husband to come along. I'm like, well, we're going to be waiting a while. And they're like, well, you sure you don't want like the Ford Fiesta? Like, no, I want the F-150. The barber shop, the beauty shop, Jamal has a bad hair day. He can just walk into the barber shop today and, get a little trim, whether I need it or not. I have, every 4 weeks standing appointment. Food or drink. When I do not want a skinny drink. Give me the big girl drink when I am out. Sports, talk about that. Any of our housing, whether it be hospitals, nursing homes, residential programs, jails, insurance. I do not know how, men under the age of 25 are able to drive cars because the insurance is so crazy expensive. Policies, what are the dress codes, whether it be in schools, whether it be in the workplace, usually it's about 3/4 of the page for women and then like 1/4 of the page for men. It's like, just keep your body parts covered. That's really all we need. And I know a lot of places now don't even offer maternity leave. You have to take, PTO or whatever, or sick time, but do we offer paternity leave as well? When I rule the world, I feel that if we offered paternity leave, we would see a decrease in postpartum depression, and we would see that men are able to bond better with their kids because they have that early time together. So you look at, we're going on 3 o'clock. So we're in the afternoon. And I don't know whether you all are in your office or working from home, but if you think about all of the unconscious choices you have made regarding your gender today, and I say they're unconscious because, again, most of us are cisgender. So what we're assigned, matches how we identify. What was the scent of your shampoo? What about your soap? Did you shave? What was the scent of your shaving cream? What color was your razor? You're like still in the shower. Did you put on any makeup? Did you put on any lotion? What was the scent of your deodorant? What kind of hair products did you use? We're still in the bathroom. What are your undergarments? What are your outer garments? What are you following on social media? And granted, we're like, day's about half over. Depending on what time you go to bed, it might be more than half over. But you think about all of the choices, unconscious choices you make in a day regarding your gender. And how, distressful that can be for individuals who are not cisgender trying to navigate that. We're going to look at this video. We'll look at another slide, and then I'll take any questions. We'll look at questions regarding gender.
You look really handsome. Are you ready for today? Are you ready for school? Yeah. Okay. Jacob is your typical energetic little boy who loves to run around, loves to play in the dirt, loves to get his hands into things.
He's just like the funnest kid and a great buddy to have around. He's also born in a girl's body.
Jacob is transgender.
the doctor said that we had a girl.
Yeah, clearly a girl. Yeah.
So we started thinking of girls.
Mia was born in 2010.
Go to Dada. Good job.
Mia really wanted to change her clothes a lot, right? Constantly, like 12 times a day.
But then the doggy sweater came, and she became obsessed about wearing this one garment for 6 months straight, over the ballet tutu, over the Christmas clothes. In hindsight, I think what she was trying to do was dispel a sense of discomfort in her, the way her image was being shown to the world.
She would take on boy personas and always want to play with boy things. And we thought, well, it seems like we have a tomboy on our hands, right? She didn't fit in with the boys, and she didn't fit in with the girls. And it was obvious to her and the other kids.
I think she felt that, and so she withdrew from people and wouldn't look people in the face when they talked to her.
Okay? You look beautiful right now. What do you think?
I want someone to cut my hair when I want it to be like that.
Her need to play boy roles and her need to be seen or spoken to as a boy at home became very persistent and very consistent. Those are the hallmarks of a possibly transgender child: consistence, persistence, and insistence. And she was meeting all those markers. I was confused and concerned, and I hoped that this obsession with being a boy would go away. I remember crying because I imagined her being in the playground and nobody playing with her. I imagined her going through high school and not having a date. A mother's heart knows when her child is suffering. He was talking about hating his body. I even found him kind of poking at himself at some point, angrily, wanting to be something different, saying things like, "Why did God make me this way? Why did God make me wrong?" A child shouldn't have to live like that. I was driving up the street and a car was going really fast, and it made it, but we had to slow down really rapidly. And I said to myself, if this was the moment where I lost her, what would I have wanted to have done? Would I have wanted to force her to be Mia for that one last day? Or would I want her to have gone happy being who she really was? And I think at that point, my mind was made up. It was April of last year. We hadn't yet transitioned Jacob, but he had short hair and he was wearing almost entirely boy clothes. We had a glorious trip. We bought him a Prince Charming costume, and he would be stopped everywhere. "Oh, how handsome. Oh, your son, he's so cute." And he just glowed.
And the look of pride on his face was like he had a ball, and it was a light bulb or something clicked, I think with us.
He was really happy in that moment. He was being perceived as he wanted to. There had been a video that had gone viral of a adorable little boy out in California, Ryland Whittington, and his parents had made a video of him explaining the process of their transitioning him. And clearly, this boy is so happy now, so adorable, so full of life and animation. And we were very struck by that. And we talked about it, and we said, what if we showed him this video of this boy? When the video finished, we asked him, what do you think about that boy? I said, do you think you might like to be like that? Do you think you might like to have a new name and everyone knows that you're a boy? And he said, I can't. I have to be me at school. I can be what I want at home, but I have to be me at school.
I explained to him that, look, we can bring you to a new school and everyone will know you as a boy from the beginning. Right then, he said, that's what I want.
He said, I want to be a boy always. I want to be a boy named Jacob. Before the transition, He didn't smile a lot. I had never seen him throw his head back and laugh, like really loudly.
He's just a different person who's becoming himself.
He started looking people in the eye. He started talking about people. That's my friend.
Striking up conversations.
Yeah. And I realized how much he had come out of his shell and how much being Jacob suited him. And I realized he had never really been me. That had been a figment of my imagination.
I couldn't ask for a better son. He's amazing.
I want him to know how proud I am of him, how brave I believe he is, and how no matter what, I am in his corner. And I love him, and I always will, because he's my son.
Oh my goodness, I just love Jacob. Couple things I want to say about that. You know, when I was talking about Bruno Mars, and I said he's a pretty man, you know, so even thinking about, you know, when we talk about how things are divided, male or female, in English, it's not as obvious like it is in Spanish, you know, Spanish adjectives and an O or A, you know, based on gender. But, you know, in English, when we hear something about pretty, you know, we think about a woman. So, you know, when he was at the beginning of the video, mom talked about how handsome he was. But when he was sitting in the at the beauty shop and they said, "You're beautiful," he did not want to be beautiful. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to be handsome. So even just the words that we use, the descriptors, the adjectives that we use for people, you know, can be, you know, interesting. Also, you know, here's a kid, a very unique kid coming from a very supportive family. I'm sure many, you know, we're, you know, working with people, we often know that a lot of our families are not always that supportive. And so here's a kid coming from a supportive family, but even he knew that he could not go to school as Jacob, you know. And again, like I said, between that age of 4 and 6, kids know what society expects of them. So I think about what it's like for our young folks that don't come from supportive families. So we'll look at this. Take a second to read that. And again, so much of what we're talking about today, you know, it's sad that we have to talk about it because it's not rocket science. It's about respect and treating people with respect. And you don't have to necessarily get it, but you just have to be there. I do find this a little ironic that the bear is not eating the rabbit, but that's a whole nother training. So before we move on to the social bias, Jamal, we have any questions?
So I do have a question about someone who is having a hard time understanding gender identity, and they use race to sort of denote that misunderstanding. So I'm wondering if you can explain it in a way that this person might understand. I'm a Black female and I want to identify as white. My skin will never change, so therefore I'm not understanding the differences with gender identity.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great, well, here's how I would kind of address that a little bit. So in terms of with the race aspect, and again, those of you that can see me, this is coming from a white woman. But we have known historically, here's a great example. And I do not know how, and I hate to mention this person because they are no longer with us. Think about Michael Jackson. And you think about Michael Jackson in the early 70s with the Jackson 5. And he was, I would say he was medium to dark skinned. And then at the time of his death, you know, he was pretty light skinned. So I don't know whether he identified, I don't know, but my point of that is saying that we know that there have been Black and brown folks that have done things throughout history, whether it be because they wanted to pass as lighter skinned and or white, or they identified as white. So we know people have taken those steps. I want to say the other difference is where it is a little bit different. It's like, if you are this person that says, you say you're a Black woman, and I'm not talking about how hard it can be to navigate the world as a Black woman, because I can imagine it can be very difficult. Again, white person here. But do you feel comfortable in your skin being a Black woman? So, do you love yourself for being a Black woman? And I think that's where the difference is with gender. So as somebody that was assigned female, so, vagina, if I wake up every day and now, as an adult have breasts, it's like, oh my gosh, I want to get rid of these, this is causing stress in my life. My body itself, not the outward society, but my body itself. And I think that would kind of be the difference. And I don't know whether that helped to answer that question, but it's like, does your race cause stress in and of itself, not based on the outward social stuff, but internally, does being, Black create stress in your life? That was a hard one. You should have saved that for the end. All right, give me another one.
I'm sorry. It was a very interesting question, though. And
it is. It's a great question, and it's truly one that I have never been asked before. So I like that. I hope that was some.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I know that Michael Jackson was used as an analogy, but you also have Sammy Sosa, who's lighting his skin over time. So it's not just a Michael Jackson thing. And I just want, for the people in the chat, it's just about the conversation of how one person sees themselves, right? It's just about how, if I was born, if I'm born male and I don't feel like I'm male, then I identify differently. So it's one of those situations where I want to allow this person to understand what it is. And that could have just been an example that person used, and not something that they are really going through or dealing with, but they're trying to understand it as best they can. So I want to make that clear.
And just to follow up with that, I think that's great. But I think that's what makes gender identity hard, because most of us don't give what we're assigned matches how we identify. So for us to think about folks not having that congruency can be difficult. Do we have anything else we want to address now, or do we want to save them?
I think we'll save them.
Okay, all right. So we've laid the groundwork. We've talked about sexual identity, gender identity, and now we're going to talk about what puts our folks at risk, our LGBTQ folks at risk. It's really trying to navigate this world that we live in. So we're gonna look at the assumption, the prejudice, and then the internalization. So the assumption is, assuming that everybody is heterosexual and cisgender. Not that outlandish of an assumption, because when we kind of look at a range, we see between like 3 and 11%. So I don't do math, which is why I do training. But if we land on like 5% of, folks that identify as LGBTQ, that's like 1 out of 20. Whether it be in your profession, I would imagine, because we see more people seeking services, LGBTQ folks seeking services. So if you tell me that you don't have anybody on your caseload, if you have more than 20 people, I would be questioning you. But when people say, oh, there's nobody in my family that I know that, that's gay. Somebody out there has their great Aunt Mary that has been living with her friend for the last 40 years. They are at all the weddings, all of the funerals, but they are just friends. We all have that person in our family. So we say we don't. But where that assumption becomes problematic is when we exclude the minority population. So, we're getting back to school now. So what do our classrooms look like? Are the classrooms reflective of all the students that they might serve? As I go, to the Hallmark store or the Target. I'm looking for a card for my partner for our anniversary. Do the words and the pictures reflect us? We're making a lot of progress. Nowadays, it's easier to find those. But as I go through the world and I don't see myself, it sends the message you don't belong. And we all have that desire to belong. If we were in person, which we'd have to be in a huge auditorium, you all would be sitting in clusters. So people that work together, people that know each other. That's what we do. We have that sense we want to belong. The prejudice, the homophobia, or as I like to say, crazy talk of all the things you can be afraid of. LGBTQ folks, really? We are the ones that are afraid. So I'm doing an in-person training tomorrow in a rural part of southwestern Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have my little rainbow flag on my collar, and I'll probably have it on my shirt tomorrow as well. But if I have to, stop and get something to eat or get a drink, I will think about, should I take my flag off? Because, there are parts of PA that aren't very friendly or welcoming or affirming. We still have so many negative attitudes about LGBTQ folks. You think about the whole monkeypox thing. Monkeypox is not a sexually transmitted disease, but again, we see a disproportionate rate of gay men that have it. So now it's a gay disease, because we didn't learn from HIV. Or I should say AIDS, because when it first came out, it was AIDS, but we still have so many of these stereotypes. You know nothing about me, but that I identify as LGBTQ, therefore you're bad. There are a lot of reasons to consider me bad. My neighbor and I, we have a running joke, even though he's not the one that cuts the grass, his brother-in-law cuts the grass, but he's like, oh, you're trying to get ahead of Tommy. I see you out there cutting the grass. Be mad at me because I don't cut my grass enough, or I don't shovel the snow fast enough. There's a whole lot of reasons not to like me, but just because I identify as LGBTQ is not one of them. And I think we, preaching to the choir now. We are living in a hate-filled world, whether we're talking about LGBTQ or just other, racist, ethnicity issues. But if you look at anti-transgender bills that have been passed since 2015, and you look at that uptick, and what really, really concerns me is those ones relating to medical care. So and we're going to look at a couple. There is legislation out there that says medical providers can deny affirming care to our LGBTQ, to our transgender individuals. Really, for all things good in this world, I do not comprehend that. I do not know how a doctor can deny, under the Hippocratic Oath, affirming care to individuals. But you see, we went from 19 in 2015 to over 90 last year. And it's only getting worse. Then we have the fine state of Florida with the Don't Say Gay. And so Governor DeSantis passed this bill, and it bars schools from having discussions around sexual orientation, gender identity expression. So here's my thing from K through 3. Here's my concern. Like, I think about my nephew who's going into 3rd grade. So what happens when he goes, back to school and they say, oh, what was the best part of your summer? And Maddox says, my Aunt Liz and my Aunt Melissa, they took us to the aviary and they bought me a sloth and it was a great day. How does that teacher handle that? So I certainly, I am all about age appropriate conversations. If there is curriculum out there for kindergarten kids to talk about, safer sex, then I think it should be implemented. I don't know whether it exists or not, but I think, what do we do when our young kids just organically have these conversations? Or what do we do, even when, a little kid says, oh, my mom's gonna have a baby. And another little kid says, well, where do babies come from? How do teachers answer that? So I think it's a big thing, but it's like, I think about, it's beyond just talking about sexual identity and gender identity expression. It's about supporting our kids. What if we have kids that have same-sex parents? So it's all great to say we shouldn't be talking about this, but this is these kids are living in this reality. Then we have Texas, fine state of Texas, so the governor said that people are supposed to report parents of transgender minors who are seeking affirming care. So if you're a counselor, mental health professional, and just a member, like, you see this mom at the PTA meeting, you can report that. And then the Attorney General has further supported this and said it's child abuse. Those of you that work with kids, there are horrific things that are being done to our kids. Parents seeking to provide affirming care to our kids, in my humble opinion, is not child abuse. And yet they want to claim it to be child abuse. Then we have Alabama, that Governor Ivey, who will probably be reelected, said it's illegal for a doctor to prescribe puberty blockers or to provide surgery for gender to under the age of 19, which I don't get that. Maybe Alabama is its own special little state, but I think they are special. I apologize if anybody's from Alabama, but I thought you were an adult at 18. So why is it, under the age of 19? So, and it's a felony. So I think the difference to, when I came out 30 plus years ago, we did not have social media. I was, if something was going on, I'm living here in Pittsburgh, if something was going on in Alabama, I didn't know about it. Our kids today are connected. They hear this stuff. They're constantly hearing this hate. So when we look at what is the impact, so our kids are worried about being denied care, worried about being able to use the bathroom. Y'all are wherever, I'm sure you've probably gotten up to use the bathroom. That 6-minute video, I've been drinking water, I've exited stage left, but can you imagine worrying about being able to use the bathroom and then worrying about being able to play sports? I mean, our kids have enough things to worry about as opposed to these things. That internalization. So as I navigate the world, I don't see myself reflected. The messaging that I get is that I'm bad. When I am getting the messaging that I'm bad and I start to think I'm bad, then I make poor choices. The poor choices lead into the health disparities. Again, just because somebody identifies as LGBTQ does not mean they will experience the health disparities, but it's trying to navigate this world that puts us at risk. And I should have said this when I had the Don't Say Gay Florida. For those of you that are not aware, there's legislation pending here in PA to match the Don't Say Gay in Florida. So it'll be Don't Say Gay in PA as well. So this stuff, it's not just, it's in our state as well that it's happening. All right, so we're gonna look at the disparities, and I will ask Nancy, I'm gonna go through, because I know I have about 10 minutes or so left. We're gonna go through this. I wanna look at the data. I don't have to talk a lot because people ask questions, or they can read it, and then we'll kind of get through it. So don't cut me off, please, in 10 minutes. So suicide, we're gonna look at some specific suicide data. Depression, we're looking at some specific depression data. Homelessness. So we know on average we're about 5% of the population, but when we look at our youth homeless rate, youth being up to the age of 24, we know that about 46% of our homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. And again, when we looked at, how are things divided, we looked at, any type of housing. So where are transgender homeless youth going? Because our shelters are, segregated male or female. So we see that. So again, that huge, 5% of the population, but 46% of the homeless population. We will look at some bullying slides. We will look at smoking. So teen pregnancy, we know that our lesbians, I know this always people think this is counterintuitive, that our lesbians are about 4 times more likely to get pregnant compared to their heterosexual counterparts. And there's, many theories, but a couple of theories is One, if I've been rejected from my family, if I have this baby, I will have something to love, somebody that won't reject me. I will have this. The other thing is, you think about what we say to our young folks. Are you sure? How do you know? So even if my school has comprehensive sex ed, I probably wasn't paying attention because I don't need to, because I'm gay. So then it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll try it. So if I don't even want to hold his hand, I probably don't want to touch his penis to put the condom on. But what if it doesn't take the first time? Like, how many times do I need to do this, before I, figure it out? And also, what's a better way to show the world that you're not gay than to have a baby? Because again, that default, if we see somebody with a baby, they must be heterosexual. And then we'll look at a specific substance abuse slide. So this data here is from the YRBS. The CDC does the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is done in brick and mortar schools. So this is not, it does not capture kids who are doing cyber. And every time I'm around cyber teachers, they all tell me they feel like they have a disproportionate rate of LGBTQ kids. They also do not ask gender beyond male or female. So we can see, and I think, the one thing I don't like about the fact that they put sad or hopeless together, because I think those are two very different things. Because if I feel sad, maybe I just want to eat Ben and Jerry's all day. But if I'm feeling hopeless, then I'm probably more thinking about suicide. So I don't like that they combine that. But nonetheless, we can see that our GLB kids are twice as likely to feel sad or hopeless. When we look at considering attempting suicide, up 3 times higher. Making a plan, again, 3 times higher. Attempting, 3 times higher. An attempt that requires medical treatment, 2 times higher. Thankfully, those were the kids that survived, that did not complete. How many kids did we lose, though, that they completed? Don't get me wrong. It's hard to be a young person today. And again, all young folks have hurdles that they have to go through, but we know there are greater and higher hurdles for our GLBTQ kids. So when we look at who considered suicide by age, and this data is from the Trevor Project. So we see that, considering, then attempting. So it's I know we're gonna have a bunch of questions, but I want to say, because I was going to open this up, but it's too hard with how many people. But I want to say, I will be honest with you, when I put this together, this slide and the next slide, they surprised me. That pansexual was so high. And here's why it surprised me. Because I hear from folks who work with kids that, oh, it's cool to be bisexual or pansexual. I'm like, really? Because that's not what I, hear from people. And I think my theory is, and it's just mine, is I think because, people a little bit can understand bisexual, but it's still like, you need to make up your mind. But, who's raising our kids today? A lot of times our kids are being raised by grandparents, which could be like people my age. And so to hear that term pansexual, what the heck is that all about? So are our young folks being supported? So while we have a greater number of people who are identifying as pansexual, which is great that that's how they know they identify, but they're considering suicide and then attempting as well. Greater numbers are attempting. And I think the other thing that surprised me about this is that more lesbians versus gay, meaning men who are having sex with men, that it's higher. Because I think that a lot of times, the assumption is that it's easier, to be a lesbian because you can kind of, because we see sometimes, gay young men like, oh, look at him, he has to be gay. whereas, our lesbians oftentimes can pass, so to speak. So I found that, it's only 2% higher, but a little bit higher. And also I think that the fact that how high it is for our questioning folks. And I think, we all think like, oh my gosh, all these kids, they know how they identify. Well, some kids don't. And we are such a sexualized society, but people haven't always necessarily figured it all out yet, which can make it, difficult. So when we look at, again, considering in the last year, how they identify, obviously our non-binary and our transgender in terms of, in regards to our gender. So it's certainly, it's easier being a cisgender man in this world than it is not being. And we see how it increases as we go through. And then again, the attempting. And I think, when we look at anxiety and depression, I think it's very interesting today. I think that the world in terms of anxiety, it's a whole different world today than it was, I hate to be that old timer, but when I was young, and I really think a lot of it has to do with social media. These kids are always connected. There is no reprieve, and I think COVID has probably made that worse when kids are just at home and, on their phones 24/7 and seeing this, the news cycle and not being able to get out. And again, we look at, attempted suicides. Let's see that, well, like a repeat. And I think this is like really kind of sad with when we talk about wanting mental health but do not receive it. I mean, for a young person to say that they want mental health care but didn't receive it, I mean, that's pretty alarming. Look at the schools. I mean, school people always get so mad at me because they're like, our schools are perfect. And I'm like, I'm not saying they're not. It doesn't matter what you think about your schools. It's what do the kids think about their schools? And, we see, more than twice as likely to be electronically bullied. We look at being bullied on school property, twice as likely, but school property is waiting for the bus, at the football game, at the whatever. So anything that has to do with the school. And then kids not going to school because they didn't feel safe. And then we're truant, and then we get into that whole rabbit hole. We see higher rates of smoking. And if you look at any of the YRBS data for everything, for all of the drugs, if they ask, all of our GLB kids are using before the age of 13 compared to their heterosexual counterparts. I think it's like, ever used heroin? I mean, that's like 3 times higher. That is like scary to me. And that inhalants, which are like really superly duperly scary, because that like talk about really frying your brain, couple more and then we'll, where do our kids feel safe? Where do they feel affirmed? And I mean, that's great. Like, more than half, that's good. Feel safe in school, but a little over a third at home. And these are for our transgender. So even a little bit less at home and a little bit less at school. And then, how accepting is our community? We only get, only 15% is very accepting. What's it like for our kids? So what I want to do is, I think we have 2 or 3 more slides. So I'd like, Jamal, if we can open it up for questions, and then maybe like at 10 till we'll look at those last couple of slides to finish up with how to be an ally, if that works.
Works for me.
Okay.
So someone posted in the Q&A, Is it ever appropriate to disclose your own sexual orientation or gender identity to a client as a way to relate to them?
I think would it be appropriate? It can't be about you. So for instance, I've done drug and alcohol work. I am not in recovery, but I think a lot of people who do drug and alcohol work are in recovery. So it's appropriate to say, I had the same struggles when I was in early recovery, and this is what I did, versus turning it about, oh my gosh, I know when I was, you can't make it about you. So I think if it's appropriate and you can do it in a way to help move the client along and to bond the client, I think it is appropriate to share. But if it becomes about you, then no, it's not appropriate. And it might be appropriate with one individual, but not with another individual.
Thank you for that answer. Samantha writes that she has a client who is biologically male. However, since the age of about 10, started to state that they are in fact a female. She wishes to have a female name and dress as a girl would. During sessions, I continually call her by her preferred pronouns. However, mom is not on board with this transition. What would you recommend as a way to normalize this transition for mom and allow the client to express herself?
So I think a wonderful resource that I don't have on here is I would suggest that Samantha, is that who asked the question?
Yes.
Samantha, check out the Family Acceptance Project. That's not the right word. Caitlin Ryan out of California has a acceptance project, and it talks about a lot of work with families. And I think she has great data that just shows how it is the Family Acceptance Project. If the impact that it can have if parents aren't accepting. So I think I would go there. I would also look at PFLAG. PFLAG has wonderful pamphlets that you can download for free that she might want to share with the mom as to how the mom could be more accepting. And because I would just kind of stress with the mom that, talking about how has your child changed? Like, this is the same kid, that you've had for the last 10 years. How have they changed in terms of their character, their moral compass? I know 10-year-olds don't have much of a moral compass, but I think just asking, like, how is your child different today than when they started to ask for those things?
Thank you for that. Meredith asks, how do you respond to parents who say teenage brains are not developed yet until their mid-20s and teens want to transition medically? Should they get a consult since it may not be reversed?
Well, yes. So one of the things I always say is, at what point, because I was at Pride one year and somebody had a transgender flag, and it was, probably like a young teenager. And my mom's like, I don't know, like, how do they know? They're too young. I'm like, Mom, when did you know you were a girl? And she's like, well, I don't know, because I wore dresses. I'm like, no, when did you know? So I think I would, gently question the parents about when they knew about their gender. And I would certainly then make sure that the young person was hooked up with an affirming therapist that could navigate that process. Because again, there are stages. So that's, you want to do therapy, then you want to do hormones and then possibly surgery. I would say it's been my experience that most folks, usually 17 at the youngest, are getting surgery, more like 18. So yeah.
So Kate asked, gender identity seems like such a huge decision for an 8-year-old to be making, particularly if there's going to be intervention like puberty inhibitors. I think that's what you called them, is what she says. How can we be sure they are making the best or right decision for themselves?
Therapy. And I think so there, and I will say this in terms of the hormone blockers. First of all, we know that when we put kids on hormone blockers so they don't have to go through puberty, that decreases some of the anxiety and some of the stress. When we think about suicide with our transgender folks, we see a peak suicide, and this just like scares the bejesus out of me. It's like kindergarten age. So you think about Jacob. So Jacob, who could be Jacob at home, but then knew when he went to school, he would have to be a girl. So we see that stress, and he was already poking at his body. So we see that as a high spike in suicide. And then we also see when kids start to go through puberty, so Jacob, who identifies as a male, the last thing he would want would be to develop breast and to start to menstruate. And it can be very stressful. So we do know that it helps with mental health if we can start to get kids affirming care. And again, hormone blockers are often financially prohibitive, but if we can at least acknowledge, I think Samantha was saying, having that 10-year-old dress and present as the gender that they identify with. But again, we're not doing anything that is going to be reversible at a young age, and certainly not without therapy. Therapy is the key with all of this.
Thank you for that. Carolyn asked, what is your opinion of the experts that she's read and or listened to that they advise waiting until a person is over 18 before making a transition?
Okay, so therapy. So I can tell you, so I worked with when I first started working with this young man, he was assigned female, identified as male. And I want to say he must have been 15 because it was like a youth mentor program. And he was really mad because we had to limit the hours that he could work, because when you're 15, you can only work so many hours. He's like, no, I can do more. I'm like, no, you can't. So we worked with him. And even though you can't tell from this picture, I'm really like 5'6", not. But anyway, he's short. And he had a supportive family, was in therapy. And I think he had top surgery. So his breasts were removed, I want to say 17 going on 18. And the first time I saw him after his surgery, I swear to goodness, he looked a foot taller, because he was just so confident and so proud of who he was that he just stood straight up, as opposed to kind of hiding. And so I think, it's a balance, which is why I don't mean to sound like a broken record when I keep saying therapy, because we don't want people to make decisions. Again, surgery, you can't go back. Once they're removed, you can't put them back on. But I do see that we see the positive mental health outcomes when folks can live their authentic life. So I don't think there is necessarily a benefit from, doing it at 17 or even 16 if you've had good mental health care for several years. I think it's a therapeutic and a medical decision that should be individualized.
Thank you for that. Stephanie wonders, do you feel it's better to ask a child age 5, 6, or 7 about their gender if they are non-gender conforming, or allow them to express themselves and wait for them to say how they identify?
I think asking gender of young kids is hard. But I would kind of say, if you're watching TV, like this is horrible because I don't know what's on kid TV, but if you're talking to which character do you identify with? Because all of them are like boy, girl, you can tell, like they're all boy, girl. And if they say none, so kind of you can start having those conversations that way to kind of put it with, because again, you're young kid, like Jacob, he did not know he was transgender. He just knew something was off with him. So our 5, 6-year-olds, they're not going to be able to say they're non-binary. But I think if you can talk to them about who they maybe see themselves in and TV characters, that might help, because they just don't have the language set.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. What if a child says they are confused about their sexuality? Schools opened up last year about putting labels, which is I cannot pronounce this name and I'm not going to try, I'm sorry. And this person's opinion is wrong, should be left up to the children to figure out.
So what's the I'm sorry.
I think the question is, if a child is confused about their sexuality, do you recommend with schools? Some schools apparently are opened up last year about putting labels on children and I guess making them identify as boy,
I don't like
girl,
that. I don't like schools making them do that. I mean, I think we should, again, going back to Don't Say Gay in Florida, I think we should need to be having age appropriate conversations. I don't know the context of why necessarily a school would be asking short of like an like a one-on-one counseling session. So I really don't know how to answer it. And I do think there's a lot of pressure. I do think, we assume, and again, like I said earlier, many folks by the age of 10 know how they identify. Not everybody does. And I think we need to be cautious about putting pressure on kids to say how they identify, because not everybody does.
Thank you for that. There's a question from Clifton. If a male or female dresses they view themselves, how do they manage public or school restrooms?
Oh, the whole bathrooms, So I actually I have a friend of mine who is, Paige is probably an easy, I'm legit like 5'3". So when I say she's tall, she's like really tall. I mean, she's probably an easy 6 foot. Has pretty much always has a buzz cut and identifies as female. And I can't tell you the number of times she has been in a public women's restroom and people have told her that she doesn't belong there, she needs to get out. And she, granted, she doesn't look like, a traditional female. She's not Beyonce. She's probably not even Ellen. But she identifies as female. I think it's very cautious. We have to be careful. And I think it's a lot easier, quite honestly. So if I identified as a trans male, it'd be a lot easier for me to walk into a men's room, even though I'm on the shorter side. But if I had, more male looking attire and there was a stall, I probably wouldn't get a second thought, versus if you have somebody that was assigned male and identifies as female, but they're like 6'2", broad shoulders, and it's, you look at this person, like my friend who is a female. So I do think it's hard. I think that's one of the challenges with our young people, is talking to them about safety, because we want to affirm their identity and support them, but we also need to talk to them about being safe. And that is very hard with teenagers, because for teenagers, it's all about me and the world just needs to get on board. I will say, where was I at? Oh, so I, not for myself, but I had to go to the hospital to visit somebody yesterday and today. And on the signage at the hospital, it had gender neutral bathrooms. Now, granted, you're not going to find those everywhere. I would suggest if there are places that have like the family bathrooms or whatever, if you can go somewhere that's a single stall. But it's horrible, and we know that it's a significant issue.
Thank you for that. I have another really good question from Clifton. He says, sex like religion is assigned at birth. How to help someone who struggles with their gender or sexual identity that is contradictory to their religion.
So he said sex and religion, like.
Right. So I believe he's asking, how do you help someone who is their sexual identity is contradictory to what their religion.
So this is me. So I was in the Army Reserves 1,000 years ago. And if you went to, and I consider myself a spiritual, not a religious person, so I don't go to church every week. But anyway, when I was in the reserves, if you went to chapel on Sunday, you didn't have to do extra chores. So I went to chapel every Sunday. But I also took that time when I was in the reserves to reread the Bible, because I probably hadn't read it since I was in Catholic school as a young kid. And so I had a red letter Bible. So those of you that are familiar with the Bible, the red letter Bible, the red letters are when Jesus speaks. And, what, and granted, when I went through basic training, I was out, but it was also, during the don't ask, I don't even think it was don't ask, don't tell. It was like, you can't be gay. But anyway, when I was reading the Bible, one of the things that I took comfort in is that Jesus never talked about homosexuality. So Jesus never addressed it. So that to me, I pray to Jesus, I believe in Jesus. Jesus never talked about it. I think when we look at the hierarchy of pretty much all of our, religious denominations, none of them at the top are LGBTQ welcoming and affirming. However, or people get mad at me, there are throughout this state, throughout this country, there are welcoming congregations. And I think it is very hard because just because you're gay does not mean you don't believe in God anymore or believe in whatever your religious beliefs are. I think it can be harder to find those congregations that are welcoming and affirming. And like I said, and I can only speak for, Christianity. I'm not as well versed in the Torah or the Quran. But that's what kind of helped me as a Christian, knowing that Jesus never addressed it. And I think a lot of what is spewed, the anti-LGBTQ hate is man-based and not doesn't come from the original speakers of the word. So I don't know whether that helps or not, but that's kind of what has helped me. And I will say PFLAG, if you go on to PFLAG's website, and I think we had that on there. If you go on their website, you can put in a zip code and do a mile radius out, and it'll tell you where the nearest PFLAG is. But I know at least here in Pittsburgh, they will list the welcoming and affirming congregations. So they're out there. I think it's just because it's important for folks to maintain, for a lot of folks to maintain that religious and or spiritual connection.
Thank you so much for that. Victoria asks, a developmental questionnaire used by many programs calls you to ask a child if they are a boy or girl and score them based on their answer, which needs to match the labeled sex. But based on what we know now, that seems like an inappropriate question. I'm not sure if they'll be offering a new edition, but they would like your thoughts on that questionnaire.
I don't think it's a bad question to ask. I think it's a good question to ask. But I think if I, as a 5-year-old girl is sitting in front of you and I tell you I'm a boy and that counts against me, that is not good. So I do think it needs to be tweaked in that respect. It shouldn't be viewed as a negative, I think, right. But asking the question, I think, is fine.
Melissa, may I say that I believe that learning how to be an ally is extremely important. And I would encourage us going back to your slides so that if that's okay with you.
That is fine. And then if we have any more time, so we'll go. So I guess, assuming that you're in the presence of an LGBTQ person or someone that loves an LGBTQ person. So I think about, my sister and my nephew, who is kind of 8 now and 8 and 5. But what are they hearing and what messaging are they taking in? So you don't know whose people's, who their inner circle is or, their outer circle. So assuming that. Be intentional with your language. So if you notice, throughout, I talk about folks, I thought it was great. At one point, Jamal early on, he caught himself when he referred to somebody as a she and said, well, I don't know, maybe that's not their pronouns. So when you think of when you don't know, defaulting to they, which is, what Jamal did. So I think, but trying to be intentional about using inclusive language. Do you have, are you dating anybody versus do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Who do you like? Who are you going to ask to the prom or the homecoming? People are already going to be buying homecoming dresses here in a minute. Stickers are great. And I think stickers send a huge message. People are like, oh, that's all it takes is a sticker. I'm like, yeah, because anything you put up with intentionality sends a message. So we see Jamal's background, the virtual speaker series. That's what we're doing here today. I'm sure, I don't know, maybe when he's on other calls, we don't see that background. Maybe it's a background of, his, fish. I don't know. But people, we see things and we default to what we see. That's one of the things that really scares me about what's going on in Florida. I guess the teachers are being told to remove some books from their classrooms. And again, if I don't see myself in the books that I read, what does that say? So, thinking about, when people walk into your space, or even when they walk into your space, what do they see? They know everything in your space. That book that's been on your shelf for a year that you went to the conference for and said, I'm going to read, and it hasn't moved, there's all the dust around it, they see it. Or if you do in-home, what's on your lanyard? What's on your bag? Stickers, pins, all of those things. Again, we would, there's a whole lot of people out there that I'd like to change, but that's not realistic. And we just want to provide some knowledge and some insights. People's values are their values. There are things that I hold near and dear to my heart that I don't want you to tell me I need to change. When you hear derogatory comments or jokes, address them. Things are not that gay. So we say, oh, that shirt's so gay. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that your backpack is so gay. We need to be addressing it. And I get in a lot of environments, it's really hard, especially if you hear it from a supervisor. How do you address it? If you're in a school environment and you can't get all of the teachers involved, how do you do it? But I think, again, we're down to about 500, a little over 550. So all of us have this power that we can do. And if we are supervisors, we can implement change. So I'm going to talk about how you can implement that change. Looking at policy. In Pennsylvania, we do not have a non-discrimination policy statewide. There are pockets throughout the state that have non-discrimination policies. But even if you live somewhere that does not have it, that does not mean your organization cannot have a non-discrimination hiring and non-discrimination in services that includes sexual orientation and gender identity expression. Thinking about your dress code, all of those things, making sure that they are inclusive and not just male or female and or exclusive of LGBTQ individuals. With that last slide, we talked a little bit about visibility. We see things, it is powerful. Training. I am so appreciative. Y'all just cannot understand how appreciative I am that you are here today. For the last decade, I've been largely doing grant-based work, and the trainings that I deliver, people are required to be there. So I know we're not supposed to assume, but I'm assuming you all are here, or most of you are here today because you want to. Maybe some of your supervisors told you to be here, but I'm appreciative that you are here. And I think the more training that we can do, the more we can talk about this, the greater. Things are constantly evolving. Again, the things I talk about today, I wasn't even talking about 5 years ago. Language is constantly evolving. And I think anymore, things are changing on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I just have to say, stop, I'm not adding any more to the PowerPoint because it's constantly out there. Doing specific outreach. So if you are in an area, where there is pride, participate in a pride event, or maybe it's the next town over or the next county over. Because if people see your organization there that says, oh, wow, maybe I'd like to work there, or maybe this would be someplace where I could go and they would be supportive of me. Is your staff diverse? Not like, oh, I think so-and-so might be LGBTQ. If you think so-and-so might be LGBTQ and they're not out, why aren't they out? What is the environment like? So you want to make sure that people, because if your staff don't feel safe being out, your clients aren't going to feel safe. Again, having the conversation. We're going to talk, we'll do resources here in a second. Making sure your forms are inclusive. Asking, what do you want me to call you? Not what's on your insurance card. What are your pronouns? How do you identify beyond male or female? Asking inclusive questions when you're getting that data. So here are a couple, GLSEN, even if you're not involved with education, GLSEN is a wonderful resource. It's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They're the ones that do the climate survey. They have information about implementing curriculum, about creating safe spaces. You can download all of their stuff for free. It's wonderful. PFLAG, I've talked about them, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Again, you can download all of their brochures for free. Wonderful resource. And the Trevor Project, which provides support to LGBTQ youth who are contemplating suicide. So again, another wonderful resource. I know Nancy's going to send all that out. So we have a few more minutes, and I'm more than happy. I don't know whether we'll get cut off or not. I'm more than happy to stay on. But what I want to just say before I take any more questions is thank you all. Thank you all for the work that you do. Working with people is hard. If they only did what you told them to do, things would be so much easier. But we need you all. We need people who care about people, because if we don't, things aren't going to get better, and things are real wacky. That's a nice clinical term. Things are real wacky these days, and we need people that care out there. So I am more than happy to hang on as long as Jamal tells me we can hang on and answer any questions. And again, thank you all for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Melissa, I really appreciate that. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, however, and so we try very hard to start when we're supposed to and end when we're supposed to. So we want to thank you for being with us today and for your presentation on gender identity and when do children know, and much more, the nuances of LGBTQ plus and mental health. People in the chat are clamoring for a part 2. So I'm sure Nancy will be in touch with you to talk about something.
Part 2, part 3, part 4, we'll make it an ongoing series.
There we go. Our next webinar, Pandemic Anxiety and Family Stress, with Dr. Mike Usman and Dr. Linda Bismouth, will be on Thursday, September 29th, 2022, from our regular start time of 2:30 to 4 p.m. And we look forward to having you join us then. And I will pass it over to Nancy, who's on mute.
Yeah, I'm so at a loss for words, I even muted myself. I am filled with gratitude that you're with us today. This subject is so important. And there was one comment that I saw, oh, well, what does this have to do with mental health? I would say everything, because it's not easy. And I've lived long enough, as you have, to have been part of a world where there was no such thing, to being part of a world where it's just commonplace. And I'm grateful to see that happening. There's still a long way to go. And none of this would have happened today if it weren't for the Department of Health. And so I want to say a loud shout out and thank you to them for introducing you to us and partnering with us to have you with us today, Melissa. And I do hope we can work it out so that we have a part 2. And thank you for all you've done.
Thank you.